Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to the November meeting of Monmouthshire's Governance and Audit Committee. We'll get straight on the agenda by noting apologies for absence. I've not been advised of any, indeed I think we've got a full house. Moving to item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest to report, please? No, I'm seeing no hands, so we'll record no declarations of interest. Item 3 is a public open forum whereby members of the public may make verbal or written representations to this committee. I've not been advised of any such requests, and therefore we'll move straight on to item 4. Item 4 is the action list from the previous meetings. There's one action that was raised at the last meeting. I understand from officers that work's been undertaken to close out this action, and I've checked with Peter Strong, who raised this action in the first instance, and I'm content to close this. I'm not seeing any objections, so therefore we will move on to the next agenda item. The next agenda item is the 24-25 Treasury Report. So I'll hand over, I think, in the first instance to John Davies, our Head of Finance, to talk us through the report. But please, John, as usual, take the report as read, but nonetheless highlight points of note. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. First off, huge thanks to Dan, who's sat with me here, for the timely update in bringing this forward for committee. This does reflect the activity up to the end of the second quarter of the year in terms of the Treasury management activities. A fairly stable period, certainly in terms of some of those key metrics as shown in the report. I think members will be well aware that some of those would have changed since the end of quarter 2 off the back of the autumn budget statement and some of the impact that that's had across the various areas, but that is of course for the next update report. We've seen a fairly stable level of borrowing throughout the period, and the average rate has remained stable as well, and probably reflective of that position where we're slightly more in the kind of balance of long to short-term borrowing, which gives us a little bit more certainty at the moment over our rate of borrowing. Our cash balances have been fairly wide-ranging through the period, from just over 10 million through to 50 million pounds. So, whilst that level looks static from period end to period end, there's been, a wide range of activity on that front for the team to deal with during the period, and they've utilised various investment functions to deal with all of that. The rate of return from our pooled funds, pleasingly, sits above our average rate of return, so that's generated 5.68% on an annualised basis during the period. And perhaps more pleasing is the capital improvement we've seen on those funds, of £87,000, which means that the accumulated lifetime losses on those funds in terms of the capital values sit now at £290,000, which we maintain a Treasury reserve to mitigate against. We continue to monitor those closely, particularly with the statutory override that's in place that allows us not to realise those against the income and expenditure account in any one year. That is due to expire at the end of this financial year, so we need to keep in close communication with Welsh Government and the Department of Levelling Up and Communities in England to see if there is going to be any extension to that override, and that's going to be important for us should that capital loss need to be realised at any point. The returns on the environmental, social and governance funds continue to be strong, slightly lower than the average rate of return across all of our money market funds, but again, remains an important proactive step for us in maintaining our ESG principles as an authority. The non-treasury investments continue to generate a positive return for us, forecasting 1.64% return during the financial year, which is up on last year, and we continue to work with our partners and working to generate further interest in those sites such that the current vacancies can be filled and we can improve on that return. That being said, it will inevitably come with some rental concessions at the front of that. So I think the ability to improve on that significantly during 24-25 is going to be limited given the time left in the financial year. I think apart from that, I think that's the key issues in the period. So, Chair, I'm happy to hand back to you for questions, which Dan or I will be happy to take. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We'll go to Phil in the first instance, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And on the NLP and Castlegate, the rent-free periods that we've currently got on, which have been dragging our performance down, when are they due to run out? They've got to be relatively short-term now, haven't they?
So we will have factored those into our forecasts, and there's a varying profile of those tenant by tenant. So, for instance, one of the newer tenants at Newport Leisure Park will have now a concession over a period, and we also have those in place across some other arrangements we have. So there's no one answer to that.
But the big one in Castlegate must be running out soon, surely, or has it? I'll
have to check back. I'm pretty sure it's this financial year. Whether it's expired already, I'm not quite sure, but I can come back to that if necessary.
I know we don't borrow specifically for individual projects, we never have, but are we likely to have to increase our borrowing to finish off King Henry?
So the profile for the budget of King Henry, as you know, contains a significant amount of Welsh Government grant and a residual amount of borrowing for the local authority.
Still 65%, isn't it?
There's varying levels of grant depending on the type of expenditure it's funding. So, for example, the net zero element of that build will attract a higher grant rate than the rest of it, for example. There's no indication at the moment that we will need to take any further borrowing off the back of any increase in budget for that scheme, so that progresses as budgeted at the moment.
Okay, we'll go to Martin next, please.
John, thank you very much. It's a really helpful report. Could I just take you back to section 5? We talked about the environmental, social governance section. And there's a very benchmark against some of these signatories to principles. Can I just get a brief overview of what we do and what we don't invest in terms of our portfolio collected altogether? So do we have principles that says we don't invest in armaments? Do we have principles that we don't invest in fossil fuel companies? All those kind of things. Just trying to get my head around, is it part of the portfolio that gets this tick, or does everything in our portfolio get the tick?
So the approach we have at the moment is that for any of the funds that we invest in, we will only invest in them if they are signed up to all three of the charters that are listed in the report. We won't make any investments in products that are distinct and separate to those. So, this is, as you know, a very complex area. So you'll have very many interrelationships with various companies within these funds. But so it's necessary to rely on these three charters that outline some of those responsible investment principles, and we're proactive in monitoring those, such that if one needs to drop off the list, and they're monitored by our Treasury advisors, we will immediately look to exit, as long as that isn't something that is, I guess, significantly unfavourable, such that coming out of it would be a total loss. For example, we would look to step that exit at the appropriate time.
Thank you, John. I'm metaphorically scratching my head to work out whether that was a yes or a no. So we only invest in any funds which tick these three boxes. I guess I don't understand exactly the detail of these three boxes. So, for example, ethical investment now includes things like supply chain. I know elsewhere a company I was involved in was advised not to invest in a major supermarket because it couldn't guarantee all the supply chains it had for all the products that came to it. So you didn't know there was child labour, etc., or anything else involved in the products you bought on the supermarket shelf. So I want to try to understand is, do we have a clear set of principles that says we will not invest in companies that do this? And do we then communicate those to our investment managers? So I think it's probably a wider question than these three specific charters. And I guess maybe it's not necessarily a question good to answer now, but if we could sort of go away and give that some further thought, I think next time this comes back, bring a bit more detail to that.
Thanks, Martin. I think the short answer is to your question is yes. We limit our exposure to those bodies through these principles of these charters. So when we brought the resolution through council for this, we outlined the charters that we would be effectively signing up to. And would only use those funds that engaged in these charters. So to that effect, council have given their agreement to this, such that we are not investing directly in such streams that you outlined. So, like I say, it is a complex area. I'm happy to bring further information on these charters to the committee. To outline some of the arrangements around them.
Martin, John, I wonder whether it would be helpful if you could circulate these ESG charters to the committee offline, just for information, if that is something that could be done. Yeah, do that, and then we can come back if we have any questions or require some formal papers on that topic. I'm not seeing any other hands up, unless people are going to correct me. In which case we will look to conclude this item. So thank you, John, thank you, Dan, for paper. As always, very high standard. I think this committee can take comfort in the fact that we have carefully reviewed performance over the period, and note that you've complied with both the policy and the various prudential indicators, so that's good. I should also note as well that I had the opportunity to speak to officers a few weeks ago on this paper, made a few points, and those points have been addressed in this draft. So thank you ever so much. We'll move on now to item 6. Actually, move on to item 6 and 7. We'll take those items together. Can Clearly, these are very, well, certainly item 6 is a very long document. I also note as well that a slightly tweaked version of the statement of accounts was issued sometime yesterday, which I'm sure John Davis, the head of finance, will talk to. But John, may I suggest you give us a brief introduction to the statement of accounts. We'll then move straight to Rachel Tritag from Audit Wales, who will talk us through the ISO 260. We'll then go to the committee for questions and comments, if that works for people. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Chair. I think firstly, probably to get the couple of important bits outlined first, I think a huge thank you initially to my colleague Ruth Donovan, who's on the call, and Dan, again, that's sat next to me here, in working through the audit process from our side as an authority and managing the relationship with Audit Wales, which again has been, I think, excellent. And I think we value the input that Audit Wales bring to the process, and the pragmatic way that we've been able to deal with some of the challenges we faced. The committee will have received the draft version of the accounts in July, and we would have scrutinised many areas of that during the meeting. Since that point, the external audit process has been ongoing, and that concludes, hopefully tomorrow, with the signing of the accounts from Audit Wales' perspective. As I said, it's been probably a much more positive process this year. It's certainly more timely. The final accounts are coming forward to this committee a good 2.5 months earlier than we did previously. And it's good to put a line under those accounts and move on to important business of this year and next as well. Importantly, we have the intention to provide an unqualified audit opinion once again, and there are no recommendations within the report for the authority. There were, as you would expect, across a complex set of accounts and tens of thousands of transactions that go through on the financial ledgers, some corrections that needed to be made, but I think a very small amount of those changed the primary statements, with the vast majority being amendments to explanatory notes to the accounts. So a very positive outcome for us, and I think that needs to be recognised, certainly by myself, to the not only the finance staff that are involved in the process, but there are multiple departments across the council that are involved, from payroll to legal to estates to HR. The list goes on. So the way they've engaged this year has been really positive for us and has allowed us to bring the final statements to this committee in a timely manner. So I think from me, Chair, I'm not going to go into detail on some of those corrections. They're listed within the audit report, and I'm sure Rachel will do a much better job explaining some of those than me. So I'm happy to hand over to Rachel or yourself, Chair, to go through any of that.
Thank you. Before you do, could you just reference the tweak to the accounts that came through yesterday, please?
Yeah, apologies, Chair. So the statement of accounts that is on the agenda was circulated yesterday as a replacement paper. There was one late adjustment that only on, I think, the second reread of the accounts we picked up hadn't fully been amended within the statement. So there was a tweak between two directorate lines in the income and expenditure account, contra entries of the same value, and the same within note 11.1. So an important change, and that it was recognised, and unfortunately we had to circulate a late replacement set such that the correct version is approved by this committee.
And for me, that just demonstrates the robust quality assurance processes across the authority. So that's why I wanted it mentioned. Thank you, John. Okay, go to Rachel, please. Rachel, please take us through your ISO 260.
That's great. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo John's comments, really, and provide thanks to John, Dan, Ruth, and the wider finance team. I think we've got a very good working relationship. The team were very responsive, turned queries around and provided evidence to us, promptly, and provided a high quality set of draft accounts and supporting working papers. We received the accounts 3 weeks earlier than we had last year, and that's in line with Welsh Government's deadline and our intention to bring the audit deadlines back on track. So again, pleasing that we're certifying at the end of November as opposed to, I think, February it was, for the 22-23 financial year. The intention is to bring it back to October next year and September the year after that. So ambitious targets, but so far so good. We've managed to bring it back to November. So the headline is, we are proposing an unqualified opinion, and the Auditor General is due to certify at midday tomorrow, following a receipt, hopefully, of approved accounts following this committee and a signed letter of representation. At the time of writing the report, there were a couple of live issues that we were monitoring, so I can now confirm there's no change required to the accounts in relation to the Rent in Homes Wales Act, and there's currently no impact on Monmouthshire County Council. And for City Deal, the figures consolidated into the accounts are the 22-23 audited City Deal figures, or Monmouthshire's share of those figures. The 23-24 figures were received very late in the day due to issues with the City Deal audit. Monmouthshire's share of those figures is not material, and the difference between 22-23 and 23-24 is also not material because we have since received them and done those checks. So we're content that the accounts are materially correct, and this treatment is consistent across all 10 of the local authorities that are part of the Cardiff Capital City Regional Deal. So no issues there, just something to note for you, really, and provide an update on. In terms of the amendments in Appendix 3, these are a very large set of accounts. I'd expect to see amendments. The fact that there's only 2 impacting the primary statements in the accounts, just demonstrates that they are a very high quality set of accounts. I'm not going to go into the detail of any of those in particular. I'll take the report as read, but I'm happy to take any questions on those. So yeah, I'll leave it there and take questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Questions or comments to either John or Rachel, please?
I haven't got any questions. I just thought it was appropriate for members to add their congratulations to the team, both ends of it. I know how big a job it is, and yes, it's been a monumental achievement, and good luck next year and the year after to satisfy Rachel.
Yeah, could we go to Peter Davis next, please? Well, okay, Martin first.
Just to say something very similar to Phil, actually, it's a terrific exercise to get these accounts signed off the side of Christmas. I know there's a huge amount of catching up to be done, and the timetable, there's nothing tighter in years to come. But to see a set of accounts of this quality and a report as clean as this is a terrific indictment of the financial systems we have in place, and actually the systems across the organisation as a whole. So congratulations, not just for John and the team, but the whole organisation in terms of being able to deliver this, and for Rachel and her team to get it delivered within a reasonable time frame as well. So, but it's onwards and upwards, isn't it? Because this doesn't stop, and the deadlines for next year are ever tighter. Thanks.
Thank you. Go to Peter Davis, our Interim Chief Executive, please.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, there's going to be a repeat pattern here, but I want to acknowledge my thanks. Similarly, I think John captured it very well. I think as Martin did there, both in terms of recognising the effort of John and the wider team we got down with us today, but it extends much further than that, as John sort of highlighted. This is a very significant piece of work that I guess a lot of members don't see sight of. I think Phil probably, Councillor Murphy, sorry, from his previous cabinet member experience, is probably the one who's got closest proximity and understanding to the depth and breadth of all of that. Profound thanks really to John and to the wider finance teams for a job really well done. This is a real high quality outcome, and that just needs to be recognised, and it is being recognised by the comments that have been received. And I do extend my thanks on, Rachel, to you and the audit team as well. So, you know, this is if we just reflect back, I guess, to the previous cycle of accounts, it was not without its challenges, certainly in terms of getting to a point of the audit being concluded, and we're in a far better position this year round. But I think the point that Martin touched on, I think John, I think we well recognise this, not just with Monmouthshire, but probably across Welsh local authorities more generally. But there is still work to be done, and I know that will require the work of both local authorities and Audit Wales to keep to an ever-challenging timeline. So thank you, Chair, for just allowing me the opportunity just to have an input here, because this is my one public moment to be able to thank the teams. So thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up, so let's look to wrap up this item. I suppose I should start by adding my thanks to John and the wider team, as well as Audit Wales. It is an amazing piece of work. Not only producing a set of accounts which has resulted in an unqualified audit opinion, but also a set of accounts which are pretty easy readable, to be pretty easy to read and understand, which is no mean feat for a public sector body, given our complexity of operations. I do think the accounts overall are very well written, very digestible, and in particular the notes of the accounts are incredibly clear, so thank you. On that basis, I think we can move to approve those accounts. Let's then move on to item 8. Item 8 is our risk management paper. And I have a hand over to Richard Jones, our Performance and Data Insight Manager. As per usual, Richard, please take the paper as read, but nonetheless highlight points of note.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So the report before you is to provide you with our assessment of the implementation of our risk management framework. This is part now of the regular 6-monthly reporting we bring to the committee. It's split into 2 main parts. Part 1 provides you with our own self-assessment of the effectiveness of the arrangements in line with our risk management policy and the evidence we've used to assess that. And Part 2 provides you with an overview of the strategic risk register and the key amendments that have been made since the committee's last update in April. As I say, it's been designed now to meet your needs in terms of assurance on the effectiveness of our risk management arrangements. As a reminder, the full risk register is presented to Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee to scrutinise the progress made in both identifying and mitigating risks. And the next report to them is due to take place on Tuesday, and it's also the full risk register is presented to Cabinet on a 6-monthly basis, and that's due to take place on Wednesday next week. So to provide you with a brief overview of the main updates to the arrangements and probably some of our sort of conclusions from the assessment we've made in the last 6 months. So the committee will be aware from our last report that we've developed an updated strategic risk management policy that you scrutinised in April and helped us in develop and shape over a time before April as well. So once again, our thanks to the committee for your work in supporting that. That policy has now been agreed, and that was agreed by Cabinet in June. So we are now in the process of implementing that policy, which is due to fully come into place in April 2025. Some of the progress we've made so far in implementing and transitioning into that new policy include the commencement and development of directorate risk registers. This is in a phased approach, taking directorate by directorate. Some of those are now more advanced, others are just commencing that journey, and we're intending for those to be completed by April, and that will also help, as we identified in the policy, strengthen the risk identification process between service business plans and the strategic risk register, as well as obviously helping to strengthen risk management arrangements at a directorate level as well. We've also started to try and integrate some of the policy requirements within the strategic risk register itself. So you'll see in the summary provided that we've now included risk category and appetite level, and the way we incorporate some of the other arrangements, such as target risk level, will be implemented with risk owners in the next 6 months. And we'll also be aiming to strengthen our articulation of the risk, particularly the presentation of the risk, to make it as clear as possible, really, at a glance of the risk and the progress being made in mitigating it during that time as well. And finally, just to note and a reminder, really, we've also assessed initial assessment of the effectiveness of integrated risk control arrangements, which link into the policy, so areas such as corporate insurance, emergency planning, health and safety, those listed in the report we brought to you in September, and that in future iterations of this report we will provide you with a progress update of their effectiveness, and particularly progress with the actions we identified in that report in September to strengthen the arrangements as well. So that's some of the key progress we've made in the last 3 or 4 months. In terms of our overall assessment, hopefully you can see that it shows, and our evidence shows, that we have arrangements in place and they continue to be embedded within the organisation. It does recognise, across such wide service areas as a council, there is further work to do in some areas to embed risk management arrangements consistently, particularly within some service business plans, and that continues to be a focus, and some of our actions around this are focused on things like training, awareness raising and support, and we're also quality assurance of business plans as well, but also the work we're planning to do on directorate risk registers should help strengthen risk management more consistently across the council. So that's our headline conclusions. And then just finally, to draw attention to Appendix 2, which summarises the changes to the strategic risk register itself. As ever, the strategic risk register continues to be updated on a regular basis in line with new evidence, updates and progress and mitigation action progress that's been made. So you've got a brief summary there of some of the key mitigation action progress and changes, which are also outlined in which are also outlined in point 3.7 of the report as well. And also we've included a diagram in Appendix 2 to try and give a better snapshot, really, of the assessed post-mitigation risk levels this year in 24-25, and then over the medium term up to 26-27 in line with our policy. So that's probably an overview of from our perspective, the key progress and key messages from our assessment for the last 6 months. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. That was very comprehensive and helpful. So go to committee members for questions or comments, please. Phil.
Chair. Yeah.
This is probably a totally unfair question, but is there an area that is concerning you that we should be helping you with?
Yeah, I think.
I like difficult questions.
Yeah, I think what I'd reflect is obviously our strategic risk management arrangements are there to identify those strategic risk issues that are causing, we have identified, potentially causing risk to our delivery of our key objectives as a council. Clearly, there's those which are assessed as a high risk, high 16, high 12. Draw particular attention, and are those that we keep a close eye on in terms of the arrangements and mitigation of those that are in place. But nonetheless, that applies equally across all the arrangements. What I would say, probably to help in terms of the role that Scrutiny Committee plays in this as well, when we presented the full risk register to the Scrutiny Committee last time, the committee themselves were asked to identify any particular risk that they would want to look into in more detail, and actually speak to and challenge the risk owners as well of those risks in terms of the nature of the risk, but also importantly the progress of mitigating actions. So on their agenda for the committee meeting on Tuesday, they have identified risks around social care, so risk 7 and 8, and also the financial risk, risk 2 in the register for shorthand, as areas they want to look in more detail, and invited officers and cabinet members for those risks to come along and look at them. So in terms of that offer, I think that's something that the scrutiny committee is already looking at in terms of specific risks and their progress. But really for us, every risk on the strategic risk register is significant, because that's why it's escalated on there. Clearly the reason we assess their likelihood and impact is to assess whether they're high or medium level risks, but nonetheless they're all important that we keep a track of and look to mitigate as an organisation.
Okay, thanks for that.
Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There are 2 risks on here. Risk 1B, which is the potential risk of a small working political majority makes it harder to make decisions, and risk number 10, which is to do with the RDLP, which is basically the same sort of risk that you were suggesting, that if we don't support the RDLP, it puts the council at risk. Do you feel that members should be more pragmatic in supporting decisions moving forward?
I think what I would say, yeah, I don't think, yeah, I'm not sure if we leave it at that. I think probably what I would say, it's important that we are identifying the impacts of our risks to the organisation. Clearly, there are a number of factors in that for us is in terms of how we mitigate them. It's making sure that there's clear evidence and clear decision-making processes in place to support that and provide a wide range of evidence on which people make decisions. What those decisions are is to be determined.
Yeah, so I think you'll understand officers' reticence in answering that question. Okay. John, do you want to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I take you to item 11, with the council commitment to decarbonisation for 2030, I've always been concerned about this figure, and especially if we look at what's happened in the last climate in the last 2 weeks. I just wondered whether we should, as a total council, be looking at something further to mitigate these issues going forward.
Again, I think it's not for me to set policy here. I think in terms of the risk, I think it's important that there's a distinguishing between the 2 parts. Risk, potential risk part A around our ambitions to be net zero by 2030, and part B, the impact of more frequent climate emergencies, such as the impacts we've seen in the last few days in the county, and how we and our partners and residents have responded to those. In terms of the commitment, clearly that's a commitment within the community and corporate plan, and in linked arrangements to our risk management arrangements, we track and assess our progress in delivering our objectives through a 6-monthly progress report and the annual self-assessment report, which this committee sees as well. And very much this risk is linked to some of our findings in that report around how we ensure we are acting in the pace and scale we need to achieve that ambition by 2030. And this risk identifies some of the challenges and some of the mitigations we put in place to achieve that. So I think the risk, hopefully the committee recognise that the risk is here to keep that front and centre of our thinking and to review our activity and our mitigating actions for that as we progress. Clearly, in terms of that will also be done by the corporate plan progress report, and something that we will continue to keep an eye on. Yeah.
Just to add to that, I think it's a fair question, and if I ask the committee to turn to top of Appendix 2, which I think is on page 195, the graphics which Richard and Hannah have kindly provided there really illustrate the significance of that particular risk, risk 11, and the fact that over the period to I think financial year 26-27, little progress is being made to mitigate that risk, given the fact that it's inherently complex, multifaceted, and requires significant investment. So, John, your point is well made. And what I take from this graphic and the voiceover Richard's given is that the council as a whole may wish to really sort of look more carefully at the activities in train and consider themselves whether those actions are adequate in light of this information. Matt, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. For the benefit of those watching at home, Matthew Gatehouse, Chief Officer, People, Performance and Partnerships. And I guess just it's probably as beneficial for members in the Chamber as those at home. A reminder that the committee's role in looking at this is to evaluate the effectiveness of the risk management arrangements, and that's the report that Richard and Hannah have drafted and is there today. Of course, we know as well that this report is available to all scrutiny committees, and I think as set out within the report, some of those questions relating to policy delivery and whether those risks are appropriate given the challenges facing officers and cabinet members tasked with delivering those policies. It's probably a matter which would sit sort of effectively with Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee, when we're more likely to have possibly as well the senior officers and cabinet members with responsibility for those areas, whereas Richard and Hannah's expertise is that around the process and the arrangements, and to make sure that this information is clear, transparent and available to the committee.
Thank you. That's a fair reminder. Yes. So what I think this committee is signalling is that there are some areas here that this committee would welcome the P&O Scrutiny Committee to look at, and we've highlighted a couple of points. And I'm sure Richard, Hannah, and Wendy will note those points and then consider whether to make suitable representations to that committee. Are there any further comments or questions? Oh, beg your pardon, I can just now see Sarah. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think my comment is I think this is an excellent piece of work and sets out in a very clear way the scale of risks that the organisation faces. It's probably to the Council's credit that most of them seem to be situational in terms of things that are happening in the world rather than organisational. But over the last few weeks, I think we've seen the scale and impact of the climate risks and also of risks in our communities, such as the fire in Abergavenny, and how staff have turned out to respond to those incidents. And obviously, we're in such a tightly staffed organisation, that rapid response to things that happen in our communities can obviously have an impact on operational matters elsewhere.
Thank you, Sarah. Any final questions or comments before we look to conclude this item? No. So, in conclusion, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Hannah. I thought it was an excellent paper. As Sarah just said, this sets out very clearly, in even more clearer form, the scale and nature of risks facing this council. I'm particularly pleased with the increased use of graphics. I think the graphics on top Appendix 2 more clearly highlight this current situation and progress that's anticipated to be made over that period. But then again, I would say that, wouldn't I? But so excellent work, and I think we can be content that the risk process continues to operate effectively. We note the progress that continues to be made to further improve elements of that risk process and look forward to an update in due course in terms of how the revised policy and appetite have been fully embedded into the authority. So thank you one and all. We'll now move on to item 9. Item 9 is the Whole Authority Annual Complaints Report. And I believe I can see Annette Evans, our Customer Relations Manager, online, who's going to introduce this item. So thank you, Annette. Over to you.
Well, Matt is going to just say a few words before I go into some detail.
Okay, which gets over to you, Matt.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Annette. And yeah, apologies, I wasn't timely enough to head down to the front bench. But just by means of a couple of sort of quick words of introduction, not dissimilar actually to my last comment, really. But what you have before you as the committee today is a report that allows you to oversee the effectiveness of the arrangements we have in place. It doesn't go into the detail of individual reports, but as a reminder, this report has evolved over the last couple of iterations in response to feedback from this committee to ensure that you have the information in front of you to be confident that the processes that we have in place are effective and the work that Annette does on behalf of the authority, which is incredibly challenging work, particularly given the levels of demand we see out there, is done in an appropriate and timely manner. So I'll pass over to Annette, if that's okay, Chair, for the detail. But yeah, just that reminder, we're looking here at the process rather than the details of individual complaints.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So I'm just going to take you really to the appendix and just to reiterate how many complaints, comments and compliments that we've received. We had 136 complaints, which is slightly lower than the previous year. And as expected, most of the complaints are from the frontline services like waste and street services and highways. You know, that is where we always seem to get our complaints because of the nature of the service. So out of those 136 complaints, 68% of them were dealt with within the 10 working days timescales, and 11% took more than 30 days to investigate at stage 1. So there was one stage 2 that was completed within the prescribed timescale, and that one went over that timescale. There were also less stage 2 formal complaints for this period. So as well as the complaints, we have the comments as well, and we had 399 comments. So they were slightly more than last year. And again, these are about frontline services. We log the comments and we deal with them in a similar way as we deal with the complaints, in as much as we send them to the managers and ask the managers to respond to the comments that are made. We log them as comments because people don't want to make a formal complaint. They just want to raise the issue with us and for it to get fixed. Regarding social services, there's a separate complaints process for social services, and we had 51 complaints, 74 comments and 96 compliments, and there was 10 stage 2 complaints. 52% of the stage 1 complaints were dealt with within the timescales, and 36% took longer. There were no stage 2 complaints that were dealt with in the timescales, and that's generally because of the complexities of the complaints that need investigated. So I just wanted to, to reiterate those figures to you, really, and generally, like I said, the complaints are about waste and street services, highways. And I've said this before with regard to waste and street services, we service 46,000 households, and that's 52 weeks a year. So that's over 2,000 collections. So those complaints, when you look at it like that, it's a low amount really of complaints that we are receiving. However, people do get frustrated when they don't get when their bins are missed and when things go wrong, and therefore we do all we can to put things right for our customers. So really, that's all I wanted to say about the complaints. So if anyone has any questions or comments, I'd be more than happy to to try and answer them.
Thank you, Annette. Okay, we've at least one question. Go to Rodri in the first instance, please.
Great, thanks, Chair. Annette's actually addressed some of the questions I was going to ask, but I did have one around the report highlights the Complaint Standards Authority providing training sessions through the year, and 33 members of staff completed it. I was wondering, do you record the breakdown of the service areas of the people who train, and are they aligned to the areas of greatest demand? So the areas in which you're getting the most complaints?
Yes, we do record who attends the training and what service they are from. And when we first started, when the Ombudsman first started offering us this training, we did target those service areas that got the most complaints and for those officers to attend the training. So yes, we did do that. And then after that, then it was opened up to other service areas for them. And like I said in the report, the staff feedback has been very good about the Ombudsman's training.
Brilliant, thank you.
Go to Peter, please. Peter Strong.
Thanks, Chair. A note on 3.14, the number of stage 2 complaints outside of the social service area, quite a significant drop over the last 3 years, from 12 to 10 to 2. Dealing with small numbers, so you could get a big variation, but I guess on a stage 2 complaint, each one takes up a lot of officer time, and time being money. Each one is very significant. Have you any explanation for the successful that appears to be in achieving a situation where we've got so few stage 2 complaints? Have the citizens of Monmouthshire suddenly become, I don't know, more tolerant, or have we improved so much? What's the gut feeling there?
Well, I'd like to say that, but I must be honest. Most of the stage 2 complaints relate to planning services. And in fairness to our planning officers, they try and do their best to resolve complaints at the stage 1. But sometimes people, they just want to go through the process to get to the Ombudsman. We tell people that planning complaints, they can only complain about the process and not the decision making. And yet they still feel that going through the complaints process, they can get to the Ombudsman, and somehow the Ombudsman would be able to change the outcome. And that isn't possible. So I can only say that it's probably down to our officers doing their best at stage 1 to try and resolve things, or provide an explanation of why certain decisions have been taken. But no, I can't really say that there's a true reason why we've gone from 12, 10 and down to 2.
Okay, but clearly somebody's doing a good job somewhere, whether it's in planning department or elsewhere. I think that should be noted.
Thank you.
Thank you. Martin.
Thank you, and it's staying on the same area really about sort of the timeliness taken to respond to complaints. So again, section 3.14. There's deadlines which are allowed under the internal rules for dealing with that, and quite a number don't meet that deadline. What's the process? It kind of sets that out, and then doesn't say anything further. I would have thought the report would say, and we have done some work with people to understand why there are delays in responding. So question 1 is, what are we doing to make sure that people do respond in a timely fashion? And the second part of that question is, do we keep the complainants informed as to why there are delays in responding? Well, because that's how we're really going to annoy them, is by staying quiet for way longer than the timeline allows. Thank you, Annette.
Yeah. Yes, unfortunately, you know, with the internal, the whole authority complaints process, we use officers from other service areas to investigate complaints. And this is on top of their day job. And, you know, it's completely voluntary. We have, you know, I have to say, would you mind investigating a complaint? And they take on the complaint in good faith, but then perhaps with their own workload, it could well be as well that availability of officers, availability of meeting with the complainant, researching, you know, what needs to be done to find out more about the complaint, interviewing staff. It's very, very time consuming to do all of that to provide a good complaints investigation report. So it does take time, even though we have those time scales. You know, 10 working days for stage one, that, you know, that's very, very short sometimes. And then 20 working days for stage two, again, is short when, you know, they have to arrange those interviews. It could well be, I mean, the first person that they interview is the complainant, and it could well be that the complainant isn't available for some time. So that will eat up into the time scale, and then the staff availability, and then looking at the records or researching information, checking out then with staff that they have understood what they're saying to ensure that the report is factual. So all that does take time. And unfortunately, you know, staff workloads are ever increasing, and therefore it's always, you know, something that's put aside perhaps sometimes because they have to do something urgent for their day job. Saying that, staff do know the time scales, and, you know, and in all good faith, they try to work to those time scales. I and my assistant, we do progress chase. We do keep an eye on the complaints, and we do chase the officers to say, how are you getting on with this complaint? Have you gone back to the complainant? Have you kept them informed? You know, we do ask them to do that. So, so yes, you know, we have good working relationships with our officers, you know, and trying to keep complainants informed of if there are going to be any delays, to give them, you know, an update of when we think realistically they will be able to get a response. So we do try our best.
Martin, you okay with that?
Okay might be a strong phrase. I understand that. I mean, this is a classic case of shooting ourselves in the foot. We set a deadline and don't meet it. So we either change the deadline to reflect the realities of staff pressures, as you've outlined, but it seems like we are setting ourselves up to fail here by saying we will deal with them within 10 days, and then we only deal with 2/3 of them within 10 days. That seems counterintuitive to me, and if I was Joe Public sitting out there complaining, I'd read your policy and like we'll be expecting a reply within 2 weeks, you know. So I understand what you're saying, but it doesn't change the fact that we missed our deadline.
Yes, I you know, I take your point. The thing is, we follow the Ombudsman's model. That the Ombudsman has asked all local authorities to follow. And the Ombudsman's model is that we try and deal with stage one complaints in 10 working days and stage two in 20 working days. And then the head of service got an extra 10 working days in order to respond. So that's why we have those timescales. But I take your point, absolutely.
Yeah,
so that Martin. Sorry, Chair. That opens up another question. Since you mentioned there are the timescales aren't set by us, but rather directed by the Ombudsman. How do we compare to other authorities then in terms of timeliness?
Well, I meet with my colleagues on an all Wales basis, and we also meet with the head of the Complaint Standards Authority as well, who comes to those meetings. And we have to provide the Complaint Standards Authority with data on a quarterly basis of the complaints and how long it's taken to deal with them and what all the complaints are about. But talking, excuse me, talking to my colleagues across Wales, everyone finds it difficult to deal with complaints within the timescales. So it may be something that we will have to, go back to the Ombudsman about to see whether they can be extended. The only thing then would be if it was extended, say, to 20 working days for stage 1, if officers knew that they got 20 working days and it's a bit longer, would they still achieve trying to resolve those complaints within that time scale? But yes, it's a problem across Wales.
Okay, thank you. It's a fair point. Let's go to Matt. I think Matt wants to come in and say a few words.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And it's probably just worth setting out in terms of the timescales. As Annette mentioned in her answer earlier, we're dependent on officers conducting these investigations on top of their day job. There are instances where Annette has to use an external investigator. We didn't have to use a lot of those in 23-24. Those that have already scanned ahead to the papers for next week will see within the Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee looking at the budget, actually investigations are one of our pressure areas in the current financial year. So there is always that trade-off. Yes, we could probably meet more of these investigations in the timescales, but at a financial cost. And that's always the challenge for Annette, as with other colleagues, in balancing service quality versus spend. Because the reality is, our officers do it for free on goodwill on top of their day jobs, and the external people, well, they're very good and are a bit more timely, come at a price.
And I would just add that with social services complaints investigations, we have to engage external independent people to investigate those complaints, and that does come with a cost.
Okay, thank you. We go to Sarah next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to check, Annette, I presume all complaints are acknowledged well before that deadline. Is that the case?
Yes. We acknowledge the complaints generally within 5 working days, just to say, we've received your complaint and that we'll be in touch about it. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I do think it is creditable that, given the pressures over the last year, the number of compliments has risen and the number of complaints has fallen. I think that is extremely impressive. But at the risk of sort of looking at the complaints about complaints and so on, do we have any kind of measure of satisfaction of the process, whether, even if people don't like the decision that's been made or the outcome, that they feel that they've been dealt with fairly?
We've tried to do that over the years, but unfortunately, it all depends on whether people have got what they wanted, the decisions that they wanted. That sort of sways their decision and their thinking on whether they the customer satisfaction, really. They don't see it particularly as the process, they see it as their outcome. And other authorities are grappling with the same.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other hands up, so let's move to wrap this item up. Firstly, by saying thank you, Annette, for paper. I thought it was very clear. It was tailored to this committee's focus in terms of reference, so thank you for that. And based on the information provided and the discussion we've had, I think this committee can be satisfied that overall the framework for complaints handling has been designed and is operating effectively. So thank you to you, Annette, and the team. We'll now move on to item 10. Item 10 is the Ombudsman's annual letter. I think that's back to you, Annette, to introduce the item.
Yes. Well, this is the Ombudsman's annual letter that she sends to every local authority, saying about her role and the purpose of the letter and giving an overview of 23-24. And in that letter, the Ombudsman has asked that it's be brought to the attention of this committee to note the contents of the letter and to let her know of the committee's considerations and any actions that are proposed. So that's why this has been brought to your attention today. Like I said earlier in the last item, we do work with the Ombudsman's complaint standards work. We provide them with complaint statistics on a quarterly basis, and our complaints policy and procedure is in line with their model. So the Ombudsman's annual letter provides a summary of the complaints received and investigated in each local authority. It tells us about the number of complaints they've received, their outcomes, the number of complaints they've intervened on, the number of code of conduct complaints against councillors, and also town and community councillors. So for Monmouthshire, they received 29 complaints. They didn't investigate any complaints, but they asked for early resolution in 3, which we agreed to do. They've also listed the complaints received by subject, and you can see that most of the ones that they received were in regard to children's services, followed by complaints handling, roads and transport, planning and building control. You'll see in the complaint outcomes that 6 complaints were out of their jurisdiction, 10 were premature, and 13 were closed after initial consideration. The Ombudsman now records the timeliness of our responses. This is something new. They never used to do that before. So with regard to our complaints, they made 4 recommendations and 25% of them were complied with on time. Unfortunately, 3 of them were not responded to on time. 2 were 1 day late and 1 was 11 days late, and they record that. So with regard to code of conduct complaints, there were 15 that the Ombudsman didn't investigate and 1 where they decided no action was necessary. There was 1 town community council code of conduct complaint that was referred to the Standards Committee, and 1 complaint they decided not to investigate. So the Ombudsman has asked for this report to also be presented to Cabinet, and that's scheduled for the 4th of December. And this report, the monitoring officer will also be presenting this report to the Standards Committee. So like I said, it's the Ombudsman's annual letter, and all I can do is reiterate what the Ombudsman has put in her letter. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Annette. Questions or comments, please? Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation report, Annette. You went through the numbers, and I noticed that there were, as you say, 15 or 16 code of conduct questions. I'm rather disturbed that the Ombudsman chooses to say on some of these cases, which may have taken a long time, these cases are often the most complex and distressing for the people making the complaint. No consideration for the person complained against. I find that quite quite sad, because it's easy to complain about a councillor. That councillor will also feel distressed at the situation. I'd like that to be taken back to Michelle Morris. I find it quite distressing.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Phil.
Yeah, it isn't very nice when it's hanging over you. I'm not quite sure of the timing, but I think I might be in there. Yeah, I think I am. But it wasn't taken up, you know. But nevertheless, it happens. You know, people don't like a decision you've made or think you haven't behaved properly. But it's just part of the job.
Okay, Colin.
Yeah, it's just something I noticed from the figures. I noticed that Blaenau Gwent and Torfaen's figures appear to be about half of Monmouthshire's or Caerphilly, and I think Newport was round about the same number as well. I wonder if you thought there was any reason for that, and whether there's something that we could learn from their performance.
I'm not too sure whether Annette's in a position to answer that question, but Annette?
Well, what I would say is that we promote our complaints procedure. We let people know that if they're not happy, they can go to the Ombudsman. We tell them that the Ombudsman will only look into a matter up to a year after the incident, and to get in touch with them soon if they're not satisfied. So we do our best to promote the Ombudsman, which is what they ask us to do as well. And I don't know whether our neighbouring authorities do likewise, or whether, you know, they are better at responding than what we are.
Thanks very much. Thanks.
Okay, any final questions or comments? No, so thank you, Annette, for the paper. I think we can note the Ombudsman's letter. There are, as far as this committee is concerned, no further actions to be taken. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move on to item 11. Item 11 is the 6-monthly update on CPR exemptions. This paper will be introduced by Jan Furtek, our Acting Chief Internal Auditor. Jan, as per usual, please take the paper as read, but nonetheless highlight points of note.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a report to detail the exemptions which have been requested by officers in accordance with the Council's contract procedure rules between the period April to September 2024. So the previous report regarding CPR exemptions was presented to this committee in June 24, which covered the previous 6 months period. So a bit of background. So although contract procedure rules were written to ensure a consistent and fair approach to how officers will procure works, goods and services on behalf of the Council, there will always have to be occasions where full compliance may not be appropriate or even possible. Providing that there is sufficient justification and appropriate approval for not following the rules, the policy recognises this, and that's where the CPR exemption process comes in. Management need to ensure that the use of exemptions is proper and they are not being used for convenience or to avoid following contract procedure rules. Therefore, the exemption process is administered by internal audit, although approvals are given by heads of service, chief officers and/or cabinet members. So as I detailed in my previous report, a high percentage of requested forms were not being returned back to the internal audit team promptly. At the end of the current period, 14 out of 21, so 67% of forms that had been requested during the 6 months had not been returned. So that caused additional workload for the internal audit team in chasing for these outstanding returns. It also raised the possibility that exemptions may not have been appropriately approved in a timely manner by heads of service or chief officers. But it was noted that 3 of the requested forms were ultimately not required, but internal audit were not notified of this. So it's also important to note that this process only captures the exemptions which have been requested via internal audit. So if an officer hasn't followed the process at all, we would not know about it. So of the 21 requested exemptions between the period April to September 24, 16 have now been returned to internal audit correctly authorised, 3 were no longer required, and 2 have yet to be returned. The comments from myself regarding the requested exemptions can be seen within the table of Appendix 3 of the report, and it is pleasing to note that where forms had been returned, they contained appropriate justification as to why the exemption was required. So as I mentioned, 2 of the issued exemption forms have not yet been correctly returned. The respective officers have been contacted on a number of occasions prior to writing the report to ascertain the current status, but still no properly completed and authorised form has yet to be received for these. These forms also now require retrospective authorisation, as based on the information received, the contracts have already been extended without the necessary approval. It was also noted that a number of other completed and authorised exemption forms were done so retrospectively, and that was following a previous contract expiring. Although adequate justifications were provided as to why the contract should have and needed to be extended, officers need to be aware of the upcoming contract end dates to ensure that any extensions are appropriately approved in advance. So therefore I ask Governance and Audit Committee accepts and acknowledge the justifications provided in the report, and happy to answer any questions with a further report to come through in 6 months' time.
We'll go to Rodri first, please. Thank you, Jan.
Thanks, Chair. It's only a quick one for Jan. I was just wondering what the process was for the audit team in terms of chasing exemption forms, and what options are available to the team and yourself in terms of escalation if exemption forms are not submitted.
Yeah, so in terms of the exemption forms, it shouldn't have to be the internal audit team chasing for them. We're not in a position, we don't have the resource to be able to do that. So it is at end of quarter, we wait and we will send a chaser out for the ones that we know that are outstanding. We will include chief officers in that chaser to make sure that they're aware that we're chasing for the information, and obviously it'll be escalated through to Peter Davis prior to publishing this report to committee. Then I know in this occasion Peter did go and chivvy some people along with getting forms in, but yeah, that's our current process.
Okay,
great, thank you.
We'll go to Phil next, and then Martin. Phil.
Very similar question, but I'll turn it round. Can we ask Peter what measures he actually took? Because this report, you could almost just keep sending the same one out. It's depressingly familiar. So I just wondered if we could know what senior officers are doing to chase these up.
No, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Murphy. I mean, I think it's a point very well made. I think we got a repeat pattern of behaviour. I think is probably the point, sort of being acknowledged, and I think it probably comes in tandem and in part with the updated and revised procurement strategy that was brought forward early last year. But that aspect, whilst the procurement strategy talks to many things, that underpinning aspect around the robustness of governance arrangements and adherence to procedure is a critically important one. Obviously, I do look in a reactive way to dealing with situations that Jan brings to my attention, which I've done on this occasion yet again, and equally reinforced into the strategic leadership team the need to ensure that down through their DMTs and managers that they are learning the lesson. Suffice to say, my emails are quite to the point if you get to understand what I'm chasing on these matters. So I think there's learning at many levels really, but I think it's been acknowledged, probably not for a while actually, but we've just seen some portfolio changes. Strategic procurement has now come across and into my portfolio in recent weeks. I've met with colleagues from Ardal, and you'll understand, I think, the committee, that we're in this partnership and arrangement with Ardal. I've met with them since taking up strategic procurement, and I'm very keen to ensure that we strengthen that aspect, and certainly to review, as Jan knows, the current process, which is one that sort of straddles, slightly oddly, maybe, internal audit and strategic procurement in terms of the administration and overview of CPR exemptions. I think I'd probably want to get into a position at a point forward where this is owned by strategic procurement. Because ultimately exemptions by their very nature should be very few and far between, and when they are entered into, they're done ahead of, not after the event.
Thank you, Peter. I think that's a view of this committee. Can I go, Tony, can I go to Martin first, please, and then come to you. Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think Peter's just about said everything I was going to say. I mean, I think the retrospective is not a good thing. We need to be making sure these are properly managed ahead of time. This is about good governance, where there's a set of rules, and when we don't follow the rules, there's to be clear reasons why we don't follow the rules. And just to that, I'd like a little bit more than adequate justification. Adequate justification was provided. I'd like to say exempt single option, single tender because of specialist experts, specialist nature of contract, or single tender, or 3 quotes were sought, only 2 were responded to, that kind of detail. Just so we understand the kind of nature of what some of these exemptions are, because I agree they should be few and far between. And if we just had a little bit more detail on that, that'd be really helpful. But I agree to Councillor Murphy's point as well. I mean, the number of retrospective ones here is a consistent theme, and I'm really pleased to hear Peter's point about sort of pushing a little bit harder on some of this. Thank you.
So just to pick up, Jan, you're happy to take that action to provide further detail in future iterations of this report?
Yeah, happy to do that, Chair.
Okay, we go to Tony next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The 2 which you're waiting for completed forms, one is for frozen food. That's an extension contract. Why that hasn't been done, I don't know. But the other one, the dementia respite bed, a lot of pressures under social services on providing services. Has that one just slipped through the net? Because it's not a great amount of money, but it's important we get it sorted out. But dementia respite bed, a lot of pressure on the staff working there. Is this just slipped through the net?
I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong with this one, but I believe this is a bespoke package for an individual. So obviously it would be a purchase that it would be unique to that individual, hence why it would fall under the exemption process rather than going out to an open tender. So it is more just getting that approval process and documenting why we've only gone out to one particular provider, because there would have been a need for that. But obviously I can't comment as to why the form hasn't been returned.
Colin, please.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to say the Procurement Wales Act 2023 now, I think it's just now coming into force, and one of the objectives of that was to support small and medium-sized businesses. So I was just echoing really the sort of feeling that other contributors have put in, just that it's got the potential to undermine that process.
Yeah. Thank you, duly noted. I'm not seeing any other hands up, so we look to wrap up this item by saying thanks for the paper. I think we note its contents and also in particular the further work in train to make progress on this important matter. We'll move on to item 12. Item 12 is the Internal Audit Quarterly Progress Report. It will be introduced by Jan Furtek, but just for reference, I think mentioned the pre-meet, we have Jane Rogers, the Strategic Director of Social Care and Health, coming into the chamber to provide an update in terms of how she and the team are addressing some of the actions as raised in the Mardy Park Audit Report. Welcome, Jane. Please come in and find a seat. No need to apologise. I'll give you time to settle before we start talking to the item. before you came in, I was welcoming you to the committee meeting. Thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us. We'll go to Jan Furtek, our Acting Chief Internal Auditor, now to introduce the paper, and then we'll come to your part, Jane. But over to you, Jan.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a regular report that I give to Governance and Audit Committee, which details the progress of the internal audit team against our annual audit plan for the 24-25 year. And this is our progress at the end of Q2, so the end of September 2024. So since the start of the financial year, the audit team has completed 23 audit jobs to draft stage from its operational plan. 14 of those are opinion related and are shown in the table at Appendix 1. So in relation to our audit opinion related jobs, 8 have been issued in draft during the second quarter of the year. So we've got the School Improvement Grant, which was unqualified, the Housing Support Grant, unqualified, Active Travel, Substantial Assurance, Roggett Primary School, Reasonable Assurance, and Service Business Plans, Reasonable Assurance. 3 unfavourable audit opinions have been issued for planned audit work during Q2. So the first of these was procurement cards. That was given limited assurance, and details can be seen in Appendix 4 of the report. So the audit uncovered several weaknesses, including improper use of procurement cards for staff meals, unclaimed VAT, missing receipts, and inadequate documentation for gift vouchers. A small number of transactions were deemed inappropriate, including purchases for team building events and items which should have been procured through proper procurement channels, purchase order, or invoicing. This highlighted the need for better controls across the procurement cards that we hold. Second was Mardy Park Resource Centre, again given limited assurance. So several issues were identified, including inadequate security controls, a lack of a community lettings policy and agreements. We deemed that there was inappropriate access to the safe at the site and inadequate handling of residents' monies and valuables. There had been a recent change in management at the site, and the new manager has been working closely with the internal audit team both through and subsequent to the review. Unfortunately, they're not very well today, so unable to attend the meeting, but as the Chair said, the Chief Officer, Jane Rogers, is present to answer any questions which the committee may have. And we've also got facilities and building cleaning, so again, limited assurance, and the details can be seen in Appendix 6 of the report. So a number of issues were highlighted, such as a lack of proactive quality assurance frameworks, inconsistent pricing, and absence of formal agreements with clients. So the report has been discussed with management, who have accepted the recommendations and is currently in the process of being finalised. On top of our planned audit work, we have also undertaken 1 reactive unplanned review, which received a limited audit opinion, and that was 7view Residential Home Imprest Bank Account. So the Imprest bank account we deemed was to be poorly controlled, exacerbated by staff absence at the site. This included inadequate signatory records, improper control and use of the debit card, and excessive cash being held on site. There was a lack of documented prior approval for purchases and missing receipts, and no full reconciliation of the account had been completed. So, as I've previously detailed to committee and within my Q1 progress report, a further 1 opinion job has been issued during the year, which has been given a limited audit opinion but not yet reported into committee. This continues to be the case. After previous discussions with the chair of this committee and the Deputy Chief Executive, it's been agreed to delay reporting of the findings of this review into the committee due to significant ongoing work within the area, and the reporting of the findings may impact subsequent HR investigations, as I have been appointed the investigating officer. These investigations have diverted internal audit resource away from planned audit work during Q2, but it is hoped that the investigation will be completed during the 3rd quarter of the year, and the outstanding audit report can then be reported into committee as soon as possible. So at the end of Q2, 48% of our audit plan had been deemed to be started or in progress. We'd undertaken 7 special investigations and reactive pieces of work during the first 2 quarters of the year. 5 of those have been closed and completed, with 2 remaining outstanding. So Appendix 3 of the report gives details of the section's performance indicators as of the 30th of September. And it's pleasing to note that overall 32% of our audit plan has been completed, which is slightly ahead of our 30% target. To also confirm that in terms of follow-up reviews, so where unfavourable audit opinions have been issued, we intend to follow those up within a 12-month period to ensure that adequate actions have been undertaken to improve the internal system of control. At the end of Q2, no follow-up reviews had yet to commence during the year, but a number have subsequently been started during Q3, and the findings of these will be presented to Audit Committee once we are able to. So it's important to note the timing of a follow-up review is based on the previous final report being issued, along with enough time for management to successfully implement the management actions with sufficient time being passed to ensure changes are fully embedded within the service. It's a challenging programme to ensure that all the follow-up reviews are completed during Q3 and Q4 of the year, which is based on when the final reports were issued. But the audit management team are working to plan workloads to ensure as much of these can be completed within the year as possible. So therefore, I ask the committee to consider and note the audit opinions that have been issued during the 6 months, that the committee note the progress made against our performance indicators, and that we are currently ahead of target. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I know Jane is happy to answer any questions as well for reviews within her area.
Thank you. Very helpful introduction. If we could go to Jane first, please. If I could just remind members, at this stage, this committee should be aiming to be supportive of Jane and the team in terms of addressing the audit findings. Clearly, they were concerning to us when we first read them, but we understand the context within which the Mardy Park finds itself. So this is Jane's opportunity just to provide a high-level overview in terms of where we are with addressing those actions, and then, as appropriate, the committee members will sort of ask any follow-up questions. But Jane, please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, members. Before I start, I just wanted to sort of thank Jan and his team for the approach that they've taken to the audit, both within Mardy and Seven View. It's actually been really helpul for us. It's given us a real insight and a clear base from which we can move forward and improve. In terms of high-level sort of overview of where we are, I just wanted to make a very quick mention. We've done a bit of a root cause analysis of why we've come to this point, and there's various factors. The site at Mardy Park is a mixed facility site. It's sort of evolved over time. It's under a Section 33 arrangement with health. And added to that, it just sort of complicates the facility in terms of really having to sort of understand it and get to grips with it. And also there was, I think, as Jan alluded to, there's been some management changes, and that previously there was some split roles in terms of accountability for the site, and particularly one lead that was stretched over 2 sites that was both south and north, which created some sort of challenges in really getting the correct level of oversight there. So I think all in all, it's highlighted to us that we'd really not had that opportunity to stand back and really reflect on where our operating procedures and our correct protocols, that, we hadn't reviewed them. There were some that were not in place, and that's given us the opportunity to really do that now. So in response, we've turned some additional resource to the facility. We've restructured so that we have now a proper lead in the north for our site at Mardy and a proper lead in the south at Seven View, so that they are more on site and visible and able to turn to picking up some of the actions that are required from the audit. And also there's the service manager role isn't split anymore. It's not a job share, it's one service manager. We've put in a pretty comprehensive action plan for both the Seven View and the Mardy issues, and myself and Jenny Jenkins, the head of adult services, have got sight of them now. I think in terms of the big chunks, the overall management of the site, the cash handling in terms of safe and the till, the interaction with the organisations that use Mardy Park, not Seven View, but just Mardy Park in that sense, and generally some health and safety issues around Mardy Park. So we have, alongside of our management action plan, also pulled in the help of some colleagues which are working with us to address the issues that we found, particularly in Mon Life, who've got experience of managing sort of food and a cafe arrangement, property services in terms of their ability to help us through some of the health and safety arrangements, finance in terms of training and getting the right protocols and procedures in place for cash handling and overall management of money on sites such as these. We've developed some, there's some immediate actions in there. For example, sorting out the fire doors. It's a simple management instruction. That's done. Door codes disabled. The old cards disabled, new codes issued, and a review now underway in terms of how people move around the building. And we've conducted the site inventory, for example. Longer term actions around review of our protocols and procedures across the site, addressing the health and safety issues around how we interact with the other organisations who use the site, Growing Spaces being one, the Wild School being another. We need to tidy up our lettings, how we create a policy around that, given the overall aims of the site, which is meant to be community focused and integrated, but nevertheless we need clear MOUs in place with them. We need to ensure ourselves that they're undertaking their own risk assessments and that we then do our own too. And we've got training coming in place now for our colleagues who work in these sites around financial management and the imprest petty cash arrangements. We've tidied up a couple of the issues around the amenity fund within Mardy. We've closed that, and we've made sure that our sort of tills within Seven View are properly labelled and that there's good controls in place around that. I've just been reviewing our Seven View Park action plan, and out of the 8 actions, I was pleased to see this morning that 3 are amber whilst the rest are green. That's not to say that we won't then feel that everything's done once they're all green. This is about how we set up ongoing controls and arrangements to make sure that we don't get ourselves into this situation again.
Thank you, Jane. All of that sounded quite reassuring, but we'll go to questions and then look to conclude. Phil?
Yeah, first thing first, these are 2 amazing facilities, and I don't want at all to sort of suggest that anybody's falling down on the job here. They're obviously not. And I know that the managers have inherited these problems, so I don't want anybody to think that they're being blamed for anything. That's absolutely not the case. And you've explained to us what is envisaged is going to be done. First of all, a question for Jan. When do you think you're likely to be able to go back to see if that's actually done? Or alternatively, when do you think it would be appropriate for us to have the managers in to tell us what they have done rather than what you've instructed them to do? I hope it's the same thing, but practicality might have changed things.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Yeah, given the number of issues within this report, I would say we'd probably want to leave it as long as we can in terms of our follow-up into the maximum of our 12-month period, to give enough time not only for the changes to have been made. Some of them are not, as Jane was saying, some of them are quick wins. You can issue a management instruction not to leave fire doors propped open. It can be done today. Other things, such as the lettings agreements and policies, that will take a considerable amount of time and depends on when existing agreements that we find might need to be reviewed. So I think I'd probably be edging towards the 12-month period to be able to do the follow-up, if not slightly longer as well, just to make sure that the changes have been made and then it's all been fully embedded within the service as well.
So can I just ask a further question of Jane then? Are you comfortable with that timescale for achieving what you want to achieve?
Thank you for the question. I think in terms of the 7 view, I think we could probably be quicker than that. It was the issue around the impressed account, and we feel that we've moved forward quite considerably around that. But I agree with Jan in terms of Mardy Part. This is quite a comprehensive piece of work. We have allocated resource to it, and I would concur with the time scale that Jan has suggested. That said, though, we've now got our sights on it too, so we are tracking carefully that the actions are in progress, and if there are barriers, we address them as we go. But I think, yeah, the 12 months is about right.
Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Hello, Jane. Thank you for attending. Regarding the critical matters, they require immediate action. Has the immediate action been taken on the critical aspects of the report? There are 1, 2, about 8 of them, I think, on there. The rest of them, I understand, would be a time scale and a programme of work to get on top of them. They say immediate for those, and I don't know whether Jan can also help in that answer to that.
So, Jan, would you be able to summarise those critical matters for Jane's benefit, please?
Yeah, that's 2.01, A, B, C, D, E, and 6.02.
Yeah, Jan, could you summarise it quickly?
Yeah, so in terms of critical, it's the risk that those open up to the authority. It doesn't necessarily mean that some of them can be done straight away. 2.01 split out into A to E. For example, we're talking of no community lettings policy in place, so that somebody has to write a policy that has to gain appropriate approval through the council. Once that has been done, then we can look to formalise agreements and contact the third parties to be able to get these agreements in place. So it's not necessarily going to be something that can be done straight away, but I know work is in train with social services to get that started at least. Obviously, the risk assessment side is the more concerning area of that. But again, I'm aware from discussions that I've had with the service manager that they are starting to be put those in place and make sure that they're there now out on site.
But you've used the word immediate action. What does that mean? If it can't be done straight away, what is immediate action? Should they be in a different category then? Should they be significant rather than immediate? If you can't do them immediately, you're contradicting what the assessment is.
Yeah, so in critical, it's a major or unacceptable risk which requires immediate action. So they do require immediate action, but we can't write a new policy, get it approved, get new lettings agreements done on an immediate basis. But the risk to the council is a major risk or an unacceptable risk, in my opinion. That is our description of the risk, but we do have to work within our description. Obviously, I'm rating that as a critical weakness and raising it to the attention of committee as a critical weakness, and it is up for management to implement then.
Will we get a feedback to this committee in 6 months, 7 months, whatever?
So yes, I think we can do. So what I'm taking from this is, and I put words in Jane's mouth here, that she recognises some of these action matters are critical. She's started to make some progress, but acknowledges that some of them are longer term in nature before they can be fully addressed. Is that correct, Jane? Okay, but yes, action started, but it will take some time to conclude, which I think is reasonable. Picking up on your question, I think it's then also reasonable that this committee has some form of update over the course of the next 3 to 6 months, that those progress continues to be made on those actions. And of course, if Jane's experiencing any problems in terms of challenges in addressing those actions, I'd expect her to talk to Jan and then come back to us, and then this committee can take a more active role in challenging those officers who are sort of hindering progress.
That was my sort of understanding when I was reading it, that nothing would be done immediately, but it was immediate action. But if you look at reference 1.02, appropriate security protocols are not in place to prevent unauthorised access. That can be done tomorrow, for example. Things like that. I understand where they sat in the frame of the requirements, but I think we need a feedback to this committee sometime.
Jane, would you like to comment?
Well, yes, we have looked through for the quick wins, like I said
Quick
before,
wins, yeah.
and the access one we have, where things can be quickly resolved. For the access, we've disabled the current cards and reissued and changed the code. So that's the quick win. The longer is a review of how people flow around the building. So where we can make immediate impact and do something that's just quick and straightforward, we're doing that.
Yeah, I understand there's been pressure over the last number of years, just built up and built up. I can see that reading the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Thank you, Chair. I too am interested in the prioritisation of this, as I would have regarded sort of health and safety and access issues as being of more critical concern than some of these issues regarding appropriate leases and licences for the partnerships between organisations on the site. I'm aware anecdotally of delays and difficulties with some community organisations in securing those kind of agreements with the authority, over which date back some years, and I wonder whether this is actually a wider spread problem and maybe worth investigation more generally. But I hope that absolutely nothing stands in the way of the wonderfully creative community partnership work that is being done at Mardy Park, that is absolutely making that site a resource for the whole community, and so much good stuff and creative stuff and volunteering effort going on that site. And I hope that no delays around the administrative and legal framework for those partnerships ever stands in the way of doing that stuff. Thanks.
Did you want to come in, Jane?
Thank you very much for those comments, Councillor Birch. And it is absolutely a balance between making sure that we have the right framework and operating framework in place that allows everybody to be safe and everybody to understand their responsibilities, whilst not undermining the aims of the site. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments in respect of this audit report before we look to ask questions on the wider paper provided by Jan? No? Okay. So wider questions then on the overall paper, please. No, I think you've got off lightly there. Thank you. I beg your pardon. I was waiting for the hand up. You were a bit slow, Martin. Martin.
Sorry, Chair. Claire, to click and click again. The other follow-up report, the limited assurance report, rather, around procurement cards is of concern. We earlier in this meeting we discussed procurement of contracts, and here we are discussing sort of inappropriate use of corporate credit cards, effectively. Should we be bundling these together and saying there is a lack of control over how we spend the council's money and how we spend the council taxpayers' money?
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, in terms of the expenditure that we've identified through the procurement card, it is the council's policy that it's only low-level expenditure that is through the council's procurement card at the moment. None of the examples that we've picked up through our report are significant spend. In individual spends, we're probably talking all less than £100 in each instance. Doesn't make it right, but just to put in a bit of context of what the report is looking at here. Obviously, procurement cards are issued. There is very much a place for procurement cards in this day and age. It allows the council to spend in supermarkets and shops, which in previous couple of years ago we wouldn't have been able to do because they don't accept purchase orders. So it does allow the council to obtain better value for money through its spend, but appropriate controls need to be put in place, hence why we did the audit to review the transactions. And obviously it's a learning process that we'll feed back into the procurement team and they'll feed back into individual card holders as well. And we will raise this during training and through policy updates as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. That's really helpful. But as you said, they might be small amounts, but still unacceptable. And I think that the acting chief executive talked about sending some firmly worded emails to people in regards to a separate item. I think some firmly worded emails here would be very appropriate as well. We can't be doing this. We can't be seen to be doing this. These things need to be controlled properly, and they are absolutely to make life easier for everyone concerned. But there can't be any suggestion people are taking advantage of these by not providing receipts, spending on things they shouldn't be spending on, etc. So I'll be interested to see what your follow-up brings, and if there are any more concerns, you can perhaps bring it back to this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final questions or comments before we move on? No? Okay. In that case, just to say thank you for the paper. Thank you, Jane, for attending. Much appreciated. And wish you best of luck in terms of addressing these points. Okay, let's move on to item 13. Item 13 is the forward work plan, primarily for noting, but clearly if members have any questions or comments, now's your opportunity. Item 14 is to approve minutes of a previous meeting. I'm content with the minutes. I'm seeing a few nods, so we will take those as approved. And finally, the date of the next meeting, as it says in the chat, is the 16th of January, sometime hence. Thank you one and all for attending, and see you again soon.
Thank you, Chair.